Hello. Can you hear me in the back? You can? Okay, great. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Those of you in the room in Chicago and those of you joining us via live stream today. I am Sinam Reed, GEO's Vice President of Operations, and I'm so grateful to be with all of you in this space today. A couple of reminders before we move forward with our third and final short talk. We are recording all of today's sessions, so if you missed anything, all the sessions will be on our website. We do not have Q&A during the session, so if you want to dig deeper into a topic, if you have questions, if you want to explore more with our speakers or your colleagues, please join us 5 to 6 p.m. right here in the 5th floor foyer. And a final reminder, all of our speakers, including Geo, would love to hear from you, would love to hear feedback. So please go to your apps and give us feedback and evaluation on all of these conversations. I am very, very excited to introduce our third and final speaker for today, Sonia Merrill, Director of Grants for Blandin Foundation in Minnesota. She's going to share today how to notice and recognize places ready to work with funders, how to spot rural thought leaders and deal makers, and stories that will remind us in the philanthropic sector of our roots and responsibilities. Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much. And I'll extend my gratitude to all of you for sticking through this, through the last speech of the day. I really appreciate it. We're going on a journey this afternoon. I'm going to take you with me to a place that I visited not long ago as a rural grant maker. It's a small town on the edge of the woods in northern Minnesota. It's, for the sake of today, we'll call it A-Town. I am taking you here so you can see this place in a real clear-eyed way with its warts, its tragedies, its beauty. And I want you to see this town and countless other rural towns as places of possibility and promise for philanthropy. Along the way, we're going to see how rural philanthropy works. You'll see there's wisdom. You'll see there's lessons for big philanthropy, especially about how equity works in rural places. I hope to inspire you to learn more, to stay in the conversation about what is rural philanthropy, and do your part to ensure that philanthropy's wealth may return to the areas that helped create it. So, imagine we're leaving the urban core of Minneapolis, and we leave all of the open grasslands, the wetlands, the deciduous woods, and we drive up into what we call the North Woods, Lake Country. These are tribal lands, huge national forests, and in particular the Iron Range, with its gouged earth and giant tailings piles from iron ore extraction. We meet the Dakota and the Anishinaabe people who were here first and who helped name a lot of these places. And of course the dozens of groups of European descendants who came here to work, the Sami, the Czech, Swedish, Greek, Italian, Hungarian. So this is where A-Town is, somewhere between what we call the reservation and the range. We veer off the highway. There's only one way into town. We pass a dollar store, countless dollar stores in this part of the country. They seem to sit at the mouth of every rural place. And so there's just a couple of streets crisscrossing each other. Houses are mainly run down. There are some where you can see blight and some where you can see pride. There's a community center. It doubles as the town hall, a post office, and a gas station. But what stands out is the school. It's a gorgeous 4-story building, one of the schools that were built during the post-war boom, when the iron ore companies took their responsibilities to the communities seriously. It's a quiet, cold January morning, but it's impossible not to break out into a smile as we enter. You know, colorful hallways, lots of kids, teachers, chatter, instruction, and you can smell that sense of lunch in the air. But we're not stopping here. We are going into the bowels of this school, into the noisy and dank basement boiler room. And this is where we meet Keith, all by himself. He is tending to the giant aging machinery that keeps the school warm and literally keeps the water running in those pipes and keeps every frickin' thing from blowing up. It's plain that he doesn't have what it takes to run this place, and I wonder if he ever gets a day off. He's a tall man, but you can tell that he walks very sad, and he's got the signs of a tough life on his face. There are a lot of Keiths in rural places. Many of you will know this. Constantly doing more with less, which is a deep part of a rural ethos. And we also need to know this about A-Town. It's a town of about 1,000 people. There's no grocery store, there is no doctor's office. And if you wanted to, you could not buy a fresh apple or a banana. A quarter of the downtown is still owned by the mining company that has an option to drill under those homes starting in 2025. 10% of people here have a bachelor's degree, and the average value of a home is about the same as the average household income, which is about $44,000 a year. 40% live in poverty with food insecurity. And 95% of people in this place identify as white. So these are really sobering observations. But we can't turn away from these statistics, because in order for philanthropy to do good here, we need to know this history deeply. And we need to know, how did this place come to be? We need to know more about rural workers and rural leaders and how they think about their context. So the story of A-Town and remarkable people like Keith have lessons for us in philanthropy. And I'm going to touch on about 3 different things. But first, let's talk about that time, right? If we borrow some wisdom from our neighbors next door on the Leech Lake Reservation, we need to think back 7 generations to understand how it came to be, and we need to think ahead 7 generations to what we are going to affect. It helps us know deeply where we stand and how we're going to make a difference. Because this town was formed in the shadow of that frenzied expansion of the 1890s, when they discovered this largest ore deposit in the world. Corporations quickly sprouted up. They imported workers to do the hard labor. This will seem familiar. It didn't take long before those corporations were riddled with debt, right? They were easily crushed and bought up by the ruthless business practices of Rockefeller and Carnegie. Together, they owned the production apparatus of thousands of workers, the ore extraction companies, the steel mills on the East Coast, and of course, of a few years, literally built the infrastructure of the American, what we call the Industrial Revolution, including, of course, New York City, where both Rockefeller and Carnegie lived. So there's this joke on the Iron Range today that, the Iron Range, we refer to it also as Mesaba, which is the Anishinaabe word. But we ought to put up a sign in New York City that just says, "You're welcome, Mesaba Iron Range," right? We feel like we built that place. And this extractive history of using the land and people who belong here to create wealth for people elsewhere is, of course, a powerful story. And it affects very much who lives there today, because people from areas like this, rural industrial areas, have been repeatedly traumatized by the booms and the busts of the mines and the extraction, by paternalistic money that could be taken away at any time and over which people, of course, felt like they had no control. But it's not that they, Iron Range workers, they fought hard. They fought hard for those rights. And some of you will recognize that these were the places of some of the most fierce union battles that this country ever saw. But the thing is, if you need to make a change or create change on the range today, you need to know about unions. Rural culture has characteristics from this history, of course. Many of you will recognize, scarcity and sparseness and long distances. There's fear of loss and familial relationships, right? Everybody knows each other. And this reality makes it a lot harder for people to speak their truth. And as a funder, nobody is going to tell you what they need, and they're not going to tell you what they think. And rural leaders often don't expect the support, right? And there's fear of losing what they already have. But it is our obligation then, looking ahead, to figure out how to rectify this and to move forward from where we stand right now. We have to do it for the kids in that school, and for Keith, and for, frankly, everyone across the United States, because we depend on the resources that, of course, derive from the rural areas, and that is not just ore. It's water, it's food. And we in philanthropy have to put our wealth to use here. And for some of you in this room, it could look like returning it to where it came from. So rural equity, we tend to talk about it as like dismantling rural discriminatory practices. We don't talk a lot about that in like big philanthropy, but our friends at the Aspen Institute, who think a lot with us about advancing rural equity, are encouraging us to think about rural equity a lot broader. It is about place, right? It is about the structure of that town, who lives there, and its history. And it is about race. Race in the bigger context of immigration and cultural identity. And it is about class, which we came to understood by those income and wealth statistics that we saw in A-Town. It is all of this. In other words, as funders in rural areas, if we arrive to do good with one lens or another, we might not succeed, and we have to combine the history and the consideration of place and race and class all together. So this is familiar to the Planning Foundation. Within just 25 miles of one another, we would grant funds to small Iron Range communities like A-Town, and also to small communities that are within the Leech Lake Nation. And of course, our approach is vastly different because of the history of the people who live there. And we also remember that, like everybody else who is in this conversation about reparations and about giving back and supporting people where they are, this foundation, Blandin Foundation, also has its own work to do to see that we have a part in the extractive story ourselves. Our funds derived from milling the trees that stood on the original lands of the native peoples there. And they were stolen, or they were flooded, or they were dammed by settlers, or by the Army Corps. And a distant government, northern Minnesota is far away, a distant government purposefully and repeatedly broke treaties with the native people before Minnesota was even a state. And so these events are powerful in everybody's memory still today, and we have to think about it as we set about healing the rural and the native communities that are in our care now. But we also think a lot about fiscal policy. I know that sounds really boring, but we have to think about the tax structures, like who are they designed to benefit and who designed them, right? And so, for example, the way that it looks in A-Town is that school, its funding base is based on the home and business values in those depressed areas. So it's no wonder that school is underfunded. And even though there's some taxation of those mining companies happening, I mean, it's totally inadequate to support the communities that still produce some industry and some entrepreneurism. it's no wonder that there are hardly resources to even clean up the blight. So generations later, a town like A-Town, they participate in what we in rural philanthropy sometimes call the rural Hunger Games. They're urgently competing for that dollar. There's never enough of it. And the way that looks too is that like that dollar store that I talked about before, that sit at the mouth of every rural town in our parts, that corporation pits one community against one another, to see which community wants that store at the mouth of the community. And A-Town and the city council was run by volunteers who care about the community and want that store for the jobs. They end up giving them a tax break for 5 years. These are tax dollars that they desperately need. And so they hope that after 5 years, the store is still there and it continues to do what it's supposed to do, which is give back to the community. So finally, I want to talk about capacity, right? Because we are funders. You might wonder, so how is there capacity in a place like this to receive grants, to manage grants from philanthropy and government? We talk a lot about capacity, right? Building up nonprofit organizations, building up intermediaries. And that system is relatively scarce in a community like that. There might not be a nonprofit. So philanthropy might have to do some workarounds. And for us lately, this has meant that we grant generously and unrestrictedly to the small local governments, even to the townships and the councils who lead them. And on the Leech Lake Reservation, this looks like giving money not to the tribal government, but the closest to the people, which is the tribal councils that literally govern the tiny communities, and some of them only have like 150 to 200 people. But the key to philanthropy, again, and we've heard this a lot during our time here, we have to get really close, right? That's why I love the metaphor of we went into the basement to visit Keith, right? We have to get really close to what's going on. And if we can't get close, then we have to find somebody who can. So during COVID, there's so much money flowing into communities, and we could just see that they didn't have the capacity to receive it. And even if all people had to do was just check a box that says, yes, we want to receive it, they still didn't do it, right? Because people are not conditioned to it, they're not used to asking. And so it's our job as part of our philanthropy in rural areas to build up intermediaries who understand these systems and are capable of receiving that funding and managing it well for the future generations. And then I'd say another beautiful way to support rural areas is through arts and culture development. So anybody who lives in a rural area or an area that is native or lives within a native nation knows that arts and culture is healing for people. It allows them to see themselves in the context of their own history. It allows them to have tougher conversations with one another and search for solutions that creates like a forward momentum for the community. Finally, I want to talk about just a couple of other aspects of how, if you are not familiar with rural areas, I want you, us, to remember that rural people are some of the best stewards of funds you could find. We're used to stewarding the lands and the resources, like I said, and 97% of all of the land base in the United States is classified as rural. That's crazy. That's a lot of land and a lot of people. And for better or for worse, people in rural areas are used to stewarding those resources on behalf of all of us. And we're used to making the dollar last, right? People can do a lot with not a lot in rural areas. But at the same time, there's a flip side to it because it also creates like a sense of ingenuity and creativity. Like Keith, right? How resourceful do you think he is to keep that machinery going? I mean, this is what rural people do. And whatever's happening there, he's going to figure it out. And there is a lot of practical wisdom and people who see abundance instead of scarcity, even though what I'm saying here could make you think the opposite, right? Because we're used to looking at statistics. And finally, Something else that's unique about rural leaders that philanthropy has to remember is that they wear a lot of hats. I mean, there are just simply fewer leaders to go around. And so people are used to serving in many public roles. So the mayor, coaches the local football team if there is one, and the teacher also serves on the city council, and the county commissioner runs a restaurant, in his free time. So and this kind of visibility also creates an accountability to one another. There's no hiding in a rural place behind titles or walls, frankly. So as I end this long story about the rural place that we at the Blandin Foundation happen to love, and thank you for coming with me, I want you to remember just the sheer humanness of this rural area and see the possibility in all rural areas like that. It's both tragic and also very beautiful, if not like a privilege. I feel a deep sense of privilege to support the rural and native communities in our care and support them out of these decades of disinvestment. And if we as a sector are looking to make a difference with philanthropic funds, I would argue that we have to invest more in rural areas and do much better than simply placing what is right now maybe 5% of all philanthropy toward rural areas while 20% of the population lives there. And if it's Native Nation work, it's 0.25%. I think we can do better. And how many of us can say that we actually in philanthropy, wrapped our arms around a place and forced a change in the structures and levers that had kept it there for a long time and kept it from flourishing? And these things, I would argue, are more possible in rural areas, and now is the time to do it. It's time for philanthropy to dig deep and understand the rural areas and the possibilities that are there. We can work with rural leaders and then wisely set aside together to dismantle these systems and move rural places forward toward a sense of abundance. We can do these things in philanthropy. And rural and native people there are waiting for philanthropy to show up. This is, I think, the possibility and promise for philanthropy. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me one more time thanking Sonia.
Thank you.
Sonia, thank you so much for sharing with us those powerful stories of scarcity and sparseness and inequity in rural America, and giving us a asset-based framework and an abundance mindset to see promise and possibility as we dismantle discriminatory practices. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending our short talks. We do have a social hour, 5 to 6 p.m., with all of our speakers right here in the foyer. We encourage you to attend. Thank you.